challenges in the measurement of nature in official statistics on behalf of Professor Francesco Maria Kelly, who is the president of this institution, and together with two of the many leading experts that are attending this meeting in presence or virtually. We designed this methodological workshop as an opportunity to complement the relevant work done by international organizations and other national statistical institutions over the past decade to advance official statistical information on the measurement of nature and ecosystem in accordance with the fundamental principle of official statistics. As already described in the concept note and official program, the workshop after the opening section is divided into 3 sections and a roundtable. Each section deals with a specific set of topics and will be opened by a short introduction by the chair of the section in order to make this workshop more accessible to non-technical experts in the field. We are very pleased to confirm that the workshop will be opened by a keynote speech by Kerry Turner, who is a pioneer in the field with a decade of experience, so well known inside and outside the environmental and ecological economics community that no further introduction is needed. We believe that the measurement of nature and ecosystem will play a key role in the future, in particular, but not exclusively within the framework of behind GDP measure. Providing robust and relevant information on nature and ecosystem is a great responsibility for all national statistical institutions that should find not only the most appropriate methodological solution, but also to successfully manage international and external coordination and cooperation with other statistical institutions and other actors to build a complex statistical framework which is intrinsically multi-data source and multi-stakeholders. Before leaving the floor to the other two speakers, let me introduce you Mandy Driver. She's connected online. She's an independent specialist in ecosystem accounting and biodiversity based in Cape Town in South Africa. She worked previously at the South African National Biodiversity Institute, a public sector agency under the Environmental Ministry, where she was instrumental in initiating a partnership with Statistics South Africa and establishing a program of work on ecosystem accounting. We have also in present Sven Kaumans, leader of the Environmental Economic Account and Sustainable Development section of the Federal Statistical Office in Germany. Is here as the chair of the London Group on Environment Accounting, which is the United Nations City Group, and is a key contributor to the methodological development of environmental economic accounting. Sven was also one of the negotiators for the official SDGs indicator of the 2030 agenda, representing the Europe in the relevant United Nations working group. Okay, so let's first give the floor to the lady. So Mandy, can you start first?
Thank you, Stefano. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. And it really is a great privilege and pleasure for me to be here today. And I'm so looking forward to the discussions today and tomorrow. I do regret that I'm not able to be there in person, particularly as I've never been to Italy. But I really appreciate that you've made it possible for me to participate online. So I first thought I'd just say a word of background about the Technical Committee on Ecosystem Accounting, which I chair. It's established under the UN Committee of Experts on Environmental Economic Accounting, the UNCEA. It was established in 2017, and at that stage, its role was to give technical oversight to the revision of what was then SEA Experimental Ecosystem Accounting to become SEA Ecosystem Accounting, the standard that was adopted in March 2021 by the UN Statistical Commission. And then from that point, the committee's emphasis has shifted to supporting uptake and implementation of SEA Ecosystem Accounting, maintaining the standard and its connections with other relevant standards and frameworks, and advancing the research agenda on SEA Ecosystem Accounting, which is contained in an annex to the big SEA ecosystem accounting book. So just a little bit more on that research agenda. It includes an element called connections to complementary valuations of ecosystem services and ecosystem assets. And that includes, and I'm going to quote directly from it, that part of the research agenda includes further refining and communicating the connections between exchange value-based estimates from ecosystem accounts and other approaches to valuation of the environment. A particular focus should be on ensuring appropriate application and interpretation of different valuation concepts in different decision-making contexts. So you can hear from that immediately that there's a very close link between the research agenda for SEA and the issues that we're going to be exploring in this meeting. The discussions at this meeting are greatly welcomed by the technical committee, and the insights from this meeting will feed into and support the work of the committee. We've had quite a strong focus in the committee on the biophysical foundations of ecosystem accounts, but valuation issues are very much on our agenda in the coming period. So I thought I would just make 3 points to give some broad high-level context for the discussions. The first one is that SEA ecosystem accounting recognizes explicitly that there are multiple value perspectives on nature. And it actually has a section 2.4. It's 3 pages, really worth reading. It's called Framing of Values in Ecosystem Accounting. And that section recognizes that exchange values, which are the main valuation focus in ecosystem accounting, are narrower in scope than other monetary values for the environment, in particular welfare values that have been a strong focus in environmental economics. So exchange values don't give a comprehensive monetary value of ecosystems, and that is recognized in SEA. They're the focus for ecosystem accounting for a good reason, because those values enable links with the system of national accounts, but that doesn't mean they're the only way to express the economic importance of ecosystems. And there's quite lengthy discussion of that in Chapter 12 of SEA Ecosystem Accounting. And then more broadly, there's also a recognition in SEA Ecosystem Accounting that there are non-anthropocentric and intrinsic values of ecosystems. And it makes the case that the biophysical accounts, especially extent and condition accounts of ecosystems, can speak to that broader set of values. So that means that the ecosystem accounts are relevant not only to economic decision-making, but also to things like conserving and restoring ecosystems from a biodiversity perspective. So I like to emphasize that accounting is not always about money, and it's not only about money, although that can be a common misperception. A second high-level point that I think is really relevant for us is that SEA ecosystem accounting provides great potential for mainstreaming ecosystems in the statistical infrastructure of a country, and that can support regular systematic collection and organization of data on ecosystems. Currently, that data is generally fragmented, partial, ad hoc, linked to project funding, data sitting in different places and not widely accessible to people who need it. So bringing ecosystems into the statistical infrastructure has the potential to unlock investment in that foundational ecosystem data, which will have enormous benefits for decision-making, not only in the economic sectors, but also in other sectors. Of course, ecosystems are outside the traditional domain of NSOs, so that kind of investment is going to require partnerships with all kinds of ministries and agencies, and establishing those kinds of partnerships takes time. So we can't expect that this will happen overnight. Also, not all data on ecosystems has to necessarily sit inside NSOs, but NSOs have the mandate to convene that can help to establish partnerships and bring the coherence that's needed. And then my final point that I want to emphasize is that I think it's really useful for us to bear in mind that SEA ecosystem accounting is young. It was adopted just over 5 years ago, and from an institutional perspective, that is really extremely recent. If you think about the system of national accounts, it's been around since the late 1940s, so that's more than 70 years. My understanding is that it took several decades before the SNA was universally implemented by all countries, and I really hope that we don't have to wait decades for SEA ecosystem accounting to be widely implemented. But I think we should expect that in these early years, there's going to be exploration, some confusion, some disagreement as we grapple with how to operationalize the concepts and the measurement approaches, what they mean in practice, where do we get the data from, how to use the outputs, and so on. What we do have is the advantage of decades worth of knowledge that's been generated through ecosystem science, ecology, environmental economics, ecological economics, and a host of other disciplines that we can draw on. And I think it's critical that the statistical community doesn't go it alone in these early years of ecosystem accounting when there's so much to learn and so much to figure out, and that we embed our work in that broad base of knowledge and expertise. And I think that ISTAT has done, just looking at the program and the agenda and the speakers, has done a brilliant job in bringing together a group of people that we have here who are going to enable us to do exactly that. So again, thank you so much for this initiative and for the opportunity to participate. And I have no doubt that this is going to be a very fruitful 2 days.
And thank you very much, Mandy. And now I will leave the floor to Sven.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Aldo, can you please put on the slides? Thanks a lot. Now they're gone. Now they're back. Okay. Take some time. Okay. Thanks a lot for the invitation to be here today with you and to have been offered to drop some words at the beginning of this conference. I think I don't have to tell you much more about myself as Stefano already did, because he already introduced more than perfectly. My name's Sven Kaumans. I'm head of one of the 2 environmental economic accounting units in the Federal Statistical Office of Germany. In addition, my unit is in charge of sustainable development reporting as well. And since several years, I'm chair of the London Group in Environmental Economic Accounting. When I first received the invitation to this workshop, I think I was a little bit hesitant whether I should come or not. But then I thought, challenges in measurement of nature and of the statistics, that's really a topic that's relevant at the moment. We have quite a lot of things going on. I think I have to move this thing here. You do it for me? Okay, thanks. We have quite a lot of things going on currently. I mean, we recently had the update of the system of national accounts that tried to take into account to some extent additional aspects of nature. We have the discussion on the global biodiversity framework. We are currently in the middle of an update of the SIA Central framework that of course deals with environmental aspects and their evaluation. We recently, I think it's 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, the high-level expert group on Beyond GDP report was published. That of course has a link to measuring nature. And for the Europeans, if you have a closer look in the European Environmental Economic Accounting Regulation, there is a kind of feasibility study to be presented by the European Commission this June on whether or not it's feasible to introduce monetary environmental ecosystem service accounts or not, and probably make a suggestion to update the European legislation on a delivery obligation on monetary values in some way connected with ecosystem services. So quite a lot of things are going on currently. At the same moment, it's not a new issue. Progress. I mean, it's not progress, we're going back in time, but at the same moment, it's not a new issue. If we go a little bit back in history for the elderly ones among us, we look at the first edition of the environment, the SEA, our System of Environmental Economic Account, or its predecessors, this interim environmental and economic accounting framework that was established in 1994, it already says something about the valuation of the nature. If we go a little bit ahead, almost 20 years ago, there was a big conference in Brussels called Beyond GDP. So even Beyond GDP is not a new process. If we look at the Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, of course, they take into account somehow the nature. And then, of course, Mandy already mentioned it quite recently, the System of Environmental Economic Accounting, ecosystem accounts, was adopted, or at least part of it have been adopted as a statistical standard by the Statistical Commission. So the topic is not new. As I'm here, one of the hats that I'm wearing is chair of the London Group. The London Group was somehow involved in quite a lot of these processes I've just mentioned. And we are always somehow in a tension between accuracy, validity, and the possibility to communicate what we actually did and what we actually calculated, especially as we are official statistics. And if I put my national hat on, if I put my national hat on, in Germany, we have this discussion even longer. We had an advisory board on environmental accounts that started in the 90s. And in their third report, they came with a wisdom and said it's not scientifically feasible to produce a comprehensive, purely monetary valuation of all nature capital in a single figure. Let's see if this is still valued today. So going back to the London Group, as I said, we were engaged in lots of the things I've mentioned, but at the same moment, we still have quite a lot of open issues when we are looking at ecosystem accounting. Classification issues, validation, distinction between what is extent and what is condition of an ecosystem, the selection of indicators to define whether an ecosystem is in good or bad condition, connected with that reference values. If we're looking at the service accounts, we have to choose different models. We have to check the possibilities. We all know that the services we measure are incomplete or often proxies for what we actually want to measure. So there's quite a lot of things still open. And if we look at linking monetary values in the London Group, of course we were involved in these processes as well, but we did not finish. I mean, linking physical quantities to monetary values, yeah, we discussed these issues, but I think we are not at the end yet. Accounting for different and multiple values, yeah, we have to discuss that. Aggregation issues are still open, and of course we have overlapping services. One ecosystem provides different services, even services could overlap, and we are not sure whether we should measure the one or the other service. So is it carbon sequestration or is it the provision of oxygen? It's the same process. It's probably two different services we see there. What we have to discuss, and Aldo, you know, I'm quite often a little bit provocative. Yep. Is there a market for nature? Or should we at least treat nature as if there was a market? I thought quite a while about that. I mean, as an economist, I like markets, but do we really want to measure the nature as a market? Nature is probably not a PLC. I mean, while financial markets accept market capitalization as a proxy for an asset value, this logic might fail for ecosystems. I mean, if you try to liquidate all shares of nature, then nothing is left. Is that what we want? And the paradox is that the more damage and scare the environment is, the more valuable it gets. And it would in statistical terms if calculated on the basis of marginal prices. So an ecosystem product based on this logic could send completely misleading signals to policy. I mean, if you explain what you did, and if you say, okay, the environment is so damaged that it's so expensive to damage it even more, then the signal is clear. But if the signal is, oh, we just have to damage the environment to increase the social ecologic product, I'm not sure if this is what we want. So probably the validation might work in a specific way if we want to subtract depletion from of the nature in a GDP, but it might not be the best way to communicate the value of the asset itself. So I think that's something we have to think about. And now probably as last slide, a little bit advertisement for session 3 tomorrow. I've already said about 3 weeks ago, we all got to know the report of the high-level group beyond another set of indicators. I mean, we already have quite a lot of indicator sets. We have the SDGs, we have indicator sets for almost everything. And now after 20 years of discussion, they come and suggest another set of indicators, which overlaps to 50% of the indicator sets we already have. So is this really the big breakthrough we hoped for after 20 years of discussion? But probably we've learned over time that an indicator such as eco-social product or green GDP, or however we want to call it, discussed in the past, I mean, we know it would have many advantages in communication, and that's the success of GDP. You have one figure, you can communicate one figure, and people misinterpret it as they like it. But that's the strength of GDP. And we all know we can't just communicate one figure for the value of nature and the value of social things. And so probably we should have, as a start for this seminar, have a closer look at the one indicator in this beyond GDP set of indicators that is linked to our work here, the indicator environmental assets, and we are going to have a closer look at that in session 3 tomorrow. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you for those two introduction speech. Now I will ask Kerry Turner to give his keynote speech, and we are on time, so basically we have half an hour for that.
Okay. Okay, can you hear me, Aldo?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Grazie, Aldo. Thank you very much. Well, what I want to try and do in the next few minutes is to give you an overview of income accounting and the role that nature might play. So both the previous speakers have hinted at the history of national income accounting. So I thought I'd start with the history.
Yeah, it's going sorry. Yeah.
Okay, so going back to the work of Kuznets and Stone in the 1930s and 40s, come a long way. And I think in all the discussions that we're going to have, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that national income accounting and the GDP, GNP indicators are extremely good at what they're designed to do, i.e. to measure economic activity over time. The question that I think we want to address is how can we get nature into the accounts in a more progressive way in terms of the natural capital stock of assets and the ecosystem service flow of value that comes from that stock. So I thought to start with a very brief history lesson. And apologies, I couldn't get anything more on the slide, so there are clearly gaps here. But basically, the point I'm trying to make with this first slide is that the beyond GDP literature and community is quite a crowded space, going back many years to 1966, when Aldo was a baby and I was a young student, right up to the present day. So the problem we have here is that all these different approaches and frameworks in this crowded field are all vying for traction in the policy process. And this has led a number of commentators to argue that what we clearly need here is some sort of harmonization process, trying to bring together some of these frameworks and data and standards in a more coherent way. So if the objective that we're placing ourselves before is harmonization, then we have to address shared definitions, data, standards, and ontology. And it's the ontology part that I think provides us with the greatest challenge. And I'll say more about that in a few minutes. So within the within the history of this crowded field, seems to me that the best framework we have currently is the SEA if we want to make substantial progress in as short a period of time as possible and still maintain strong links to the SNA framework and the protocols that underline the SNA. So I'm going to look at two challenges. One economic challenge internal in the accounts, and that's the now infamous exchange value versus welfare value problem that we have. And the second challenge, I'm going to look at a more interdisciplinary way and try to address the issue of plural values in nature head on. So taking the exchange value versus welfare values first. This is a standard slide that my students have been tortured with over the years. But the point I'm going to make is at the top there, that as you move from left to right, as you look at this slide, the moral compass being used is changing. And so if I go back to my harmonization barrier, we have a problem of different ontologies playing out underneath these different sets of ideas. So on the left-hand side, you've got the standard economic approach, which is individualism and utilitarian philosophy based, in which individuals hold private preferences, in our case, to nature and nature's assets, and how do we put a monetary value via those private preferences. And the little slide just goes through the various methods that we've got for dealing with that. But within environmental and ecological economics, quite a bit of thought's been given to a different philosophical position, which I've just called here collectivism, which is a deontological position. In other words, it's based on rights and interests and rules and regulations. And if we move from individualism to collectivism, we recognize that individuals not only hold private preferences, but also social public preferences. And in particular, they tend to hold these over a range of environmental assets and ecosystem services. And then finally, to the right of the diagram, if you push the philosophical moral compass further, we get into bioethical realms in which non-preference values are expressed for nature and nature services. and we enter the tricky world of intrinsic value in nature. Okay. So here's just a different way of thinking about this change in the moral compass. So in terms of ecosystem services and their application, the ethic that underpins what we seem to be arguing for at the moment is a stewardship ethic, which goes back a long time. In fact, goes back to John Stuart Mill in the 1800s and was taken forward in the 1930s and 40s by a man called Aldo Leopold and the Leopold ethic. So under this stewardship ethic, we end up with our plural values in nature being divided into use, option, and non-use. And the valuation methods being used are exchange value or cost methods and the welfare values via contingent valuation and choice experiments. But pushing the compass across, what about the social values? These tend to be collectivist, and I include in this category some recent values that have come on the policy scene through IPBES, the relational value in nature, which seems to me is a form of collectivist value. And trying to get at that value, we may have to use deliberation or other methods. And then finally, on the end of the slide, we have bioethical positions, which are based on natural science data, and the value is non-monetary, and we account for it in terms of a quantitative or a qualitative method. And then before I move from this slide, just a little plug from me. Over the last 40 years, I've argued with economists that TSV, total economic value, is not equivalent to total system value, and that there's an extra value in terms of a minimum amount of processes and functions in the environment that I've in the past called glue value, which when added on ends up in total system value. Okay, now quite a lot going on this slide. It's just trying to emphasize the history of where we've come from and where we're trying to get to. So the top level is the ethics and philosophy, going from stewardship ethics through the land ethic and further out. In the middle is the ecosystem service concept. Where did it come from? How do we develop it? Where is it going in the future? And at the bottom, alongside these older versions of thinking, we've got accounting and policy frameworks, which the previous two speakers have very ably talked about. So my issue here is the two challenges are, the two challenges are slightly different in terms of their complexity. The exchange value versus welfare value challenge, I think we can make some progress in the near term with data platforms that are being developed like Aries and machine learning techniques that many people are now deploying. We can also get a few more ecosystem services into the accounts by using maybe a simulated demand curve approach or even an abatement cost model. So we're still in a monetary value and we're still fairly closely linked to an exchange value. If we want to push further into economic welfare values, then we have to address the fact that a number of the valuation methods involved here are survey-based, and there are both proponents of that approach and critics of that approach. Personally, I think the critics are overly done in terms of the value that a survey-based willingness to pay method can produce. But as the SNA protocol is currently set up, these values will not fit into that protocol. Okay. The second challenge that I mentioned was the ethical challenge. That, I think, is a much more difficult issue to deal with. The underlying ethics involved may mean that the values and the value perspectives are quite different and are often resistant to monetary values and are often resistant to quantitative accounts. So what's my answer to make some short-term progress? Well, my answer is to develop a complementary accounting network that we call CAN, C-A-N. And this would be a standard as a parallel system to the SNA and the SEEA accounts. And the parallel system would operate alongside these other indicators and give us a dashboard of indicators. So the CAN would include the standard GDP indicators and the SEEA monetary indicators, but alongside would carry a measure of some of the ecosystem services in welfare value terms, some of the ecosystem services in ecological quantitative terms, and I think a particularly difficult area, the social cultural values, which are difficult to express in monetary terms and even in quantitative terms for some of them. To meet the protocol within the SNA, the CAN dashboard would have to use time series data over a common time horizon. So you'd have GDP traveling over time and the CAN indicators mirroring that in terms of time series. What we've found in trying to develop this CAN is that time series data is often not available where you think it might be. And so that's another challenge that we have to account for. So this is the CAN network, the types of indicators that we would see in a CAN array, including the SNA, some ecosystem health indicators, welfare indicators, social cultural, and the SEEA accounts. So again, it's not meant to be completely comprehensive. So the dashboard would include candidates from each of these nodes in the network. Now you'd end up with a matrix in which we have the standard GDP over time, the extended SNA or SEA indicators over the same period of time, including other indicators like genuine savings, ecological indicators in quantified but physical terms, and the seen total nest thing there is just because, as you'll see later in the workshop, we've developed this for a monetary marine system. And sea turtle nests or species accounts might be another indicator that we could use. And then finally, for cultural indicators, we've just used the example of blue flag awards on the coast, which indicates a given community's value of that type of beach or beach environment. So the overall idea here is a series of indicators sitting alongside GDP and the SNA, SEA indicators, which gives us or gives policymakers a more comprehensive picture without having to go for full harmonization and integration of these various indicators into the standard SNA type accounts, which I think may be a long-term goal, but in terms of the policy world and policy indicators, the state of our national and international environment is such that we need to make progress quickly and effectively and put these sorts of evidence bases in front of policymakers in a meaningful and a way in which they can see the urgency with which we need to operate the system. And my worry is that inside a technical debate about forcing welfare values or other values into an SNA framework might lose policymakers, whereas this parallel set of indicators might well broaden the policy debate. Okay. Thank you for your attention. And if you want to know a bit more about the CAN idea, it's just been published in a journal called Ecosystem Services. And my colleague Valentina Di Gennaro will talk a bit later in this workshop of the actual empirical application that we've done for a marine and coastal resource system. Grazie.
Good afternoon, Professor Turner. I'm Aldo Ravazzi from the Italian Ministry of Environment and chair of the Biodiversity Working CD. The question was to have your feeling, if you can share feeling on the possibility to advance our measurement work, in our statistical work, thanks to the Biodiversity Convention and the IBES, the Intergovernmental Panel of Scientists on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which at the same time are making to make the policy so to use them. What is the relationship between the two? Do you see any space for cooperation and common advancement? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think that the CAN format that I'm proposing is capable of including the IP-BES type values as well as others. And so the whole point of the CAN is to try and, in a short space of time, if we have the time series data available, to produce a dashboard for policymakers, which isn't bounded by the SNA protocol, but includes the SNA and its protocol, but alongside that includes other indicators, monetary indicators and non-monetary indicators. The only protocol in CAN is that they have to be time series data, and all the data indicators ideally should be running over the same time horizon. So a policymaker is looking at GDP over time, for example, and then looking at the amount of water quality declined by some indicator or other, and a whole series of other indicators, both monetary and non-monetary.
I think it's my turn now, right, Stefano? And before posing my question, I would like to make sure that the people online can hear me. Some comment.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, the question is quite simple. I didn't see the CS. Thank you, Kaya. The SIA Central framework in your slides. So is there a place for it in the complementary accounting network? Then I was, and for the several indicators that can be and are derived and used in official statistics from the SIA Central framework already. And I was also mentioning that our pupil, Valentina, will further illustrate the complementary accounting network tomorrow in session 3 using the marine accounting case. You've developed it. What's the question?
The question, yeah, my apologies. It wasn't a deliberate omission. I was just conscious that the slides already have a lot of information on them. And so there was no motive behind it to not include a central framework.
We cannot mute these sounds, unfortunately. Okay, now let's move to the first section. So I will ask Sandra and all the speakers to move side of the desk.
Sorry about the late. We are trying to set the presentation. Please wait for a while. Sorry about that. Okay, perfect. Okay, so good afternoon. To our workshop. I introduce myself and the Environmental and Territorial Division at the Department of Economics, Environmental and National Council. My pleasure to open the session showing the stimulating ideas raised in Professor Turner's speech. I will try to stay on track, I hope, and within the time allotted. My brief introduction has two aims. And the first is to provide, is a very basic introduction, so it's for not specialist people. And the first aim is to provide an accessible overview of the conceptual frameworks for measuring nature, bringing all colleagues up to speed, including those less familiar with the topics, and with a broader goal to take an ecosystem account beyond the specialist circle of environmental and national accounting. And the second aim is to highlight how the inherently multidisciplinary challenge of ecosystem accounts can be approached through the tools and quality principle of official statistics. So I turn now to introduce the framework of the intersection of between the nature and the economy. So it's a low profile compared to the Professor Turner ones, but I'll try to explain in a very basic way. So this intersection between nature and economy generated the conceptual space of the natural capital. Nature is the foundation independently of human presence, while natural capital is the economic lens through which to read the interaction between nature and economy from a human perspective. We should always keep in mind as an anchor of our reasoning that what we are measuring in the space of natural capital is a subset of what the Italian Natural Capital Committee has called nature for nature. That is the full set of functions and interaction at local and global level that nature performs to sustain itself. We will discuss about that in this concept in the third section tomorrow. So by now, this is the background. And here we focus on the objective of measuring natural capital, what we want to measure and how to do so through the principle of official statistics. The challenge is multiple. quantifying heterogeneous entities through biophysical measurement and indices, and aggregated them into comparable indicators. The key insight is this: given that the object of the measure lies predominantly on the ecological side, and given the need to anchor measurement to the framework of environmental and national accounting, the emphasis must be placed on the integrated system of data, tool, and multidisciplinary expertise, which is in itself a very ambitious goal. One principle deserves particular attention for accounting purposes, especially explicit data are essential. Through a bottom-up approach, they allow information to be reconstructed by ecosystem type at high geographic resolution and validated at the subnational level, eco-regional or administrative, depending on the analytical and policy objectives. And next slide. And the historical concept of natural capital, not too much maybe, 5. Yes, it's okay. Sorry. The historical concept of natural capital, as traced in the Stefano Menghinello overview, refers to natural resources as stocks, whose implicit quality reflects their productivity capacity to generate returns in the form of service flow. The conceptual evolution embedded in the CE ecosystem account is nuanced but significant. The framework moves behind stocks alone to consider 3 interconnected dimensions: their extent, their explicit quality, measured through the ecosystem account condition accounts, and the service flow they generate. The ecosystem accounting framework adopts a partial approach whereby accounts are built from georeferenced maps of natural assets, since the benefits ecosystem provide depend on where they are located relative to the beneficiaries, which is the thing that radically distinguish it from the SIA central framework. And go into detail of that in a basic way. The ecosystem account framework was first adopted as a UN standard, statistical standard in 2021, and subsequently given legal force in Europe through the EU regulation 2024/3024. Ecosystem extent accounts measure the surface area of ecosystem types and their individual asset. Answer of the foundation question: how much natural capital is there? Maybe the next. Okay. And ecosystem condition accounts measure the quality of function and functional integrity of ecosystem through biophysical indicators. Here the question becomes, what is the state of the stocks? Ecosystem services account measures service flow in physical unit, optionally monetary, distinguish between supply and actual use. As regard monetary accounts, the implication will be addressed tomorrow in the session 2. In the next slide, I propose only an overview of the complex of the system. And as required by the EU regulation, at the first level, it is mandatory to measure the extent of 12 ecosystem types, 9 condition variables classified according to a taxonomy that distinguishes abiotic ecosystem characteristics relating to physical and chemical state, biotic ecosystem characteristics relating to compositional, structural, and functional state, the landscape level characteristics for landscape and seascape, and finally, 7 ecosystem services expressed at use per economic unit and as a supply flow per ecosystem types. For completeness, the framework also includes ecosystem thematic accounts covering biodiversity, climate change, oceans, and urban areas, which provide an interesting measurement approach for geographic domains that cut across the multiple ecosystem types. And we are trying to explore this side. In fact, a good example is exactly the urban areas that can be read via the thematic accounts framework through the lens of their overall profile in terms of asset condition, pressures, and network-based services. I try to highlight some key points of the conceptual framework that will also be taken up by the session speakers in the following presentation. I would like to draw attention to two in particular. The logic shift from single resource physical flow, the CIA central framework approach, to the multiple ecosystem services, which is in the CIA ecosystem accounting, at the constitutive role of geography. The CEA does not treat geographic location as an additional or secondary information, but as a constitutive characteristic of ecosystem, their services. The ecosystem cannot be measured without knowing where it is located, how large it is, and in what human context is embedded. Geography is not a backdrop, it is an integral part of the measurement. This is the way that CEE requires georeference maps as the basis of the accounts rather than statistical aggregation by resource category. The four presentations that following will explore in depth, among other things, the crucial role of defining and measuring ecosystem extent, the role of condition as a pillar of accounts and as a bridge between ecosystem extent and services, and the component of the unused services and their intrinsic value. Applying ecosystem accounting is a genuinely complex endeavor, one that called for scientific experts spanning several thematic disciplines, public bodies, and research institutions working together. This kind of collaboration cannot happen without integrated governance. In Italy, we have built this through an interinstitutional working group responsible for implementing the EU regulation, and we have truly tried to bring together the best. I thank you, all colleagues, for that. Finally, we are trying to do that also to meet the challenges ahead. And first and foremost, the reporting of accounts to Eurostat, and then looking to advance and harmonize the statistical system by exploiting new data sources, integrating different statistical production areas, environment, ecosystem account, and national account in our institute in particular, sustaining their institutional governance needed to support the harmonized implementation of both the European Ecosystem Accounts Framework and the NATO Restoration Regulation. So thank you very much for your patient attention, and I will move to the colleague presentation. Thanks a lot. So the system works. It's the bad thing. And I will now hand over to the first speaker. That is Giulia Capotorti. No. So, okay. Giulia Capotorti is from Sapienza University of Rome, and she co-coordinates with Michele Munafò of ISPRA and Raffaella Chiocchini of ISTAT the work package on ecosystem accent and condition within the interinstitutional working group. And when will possible? Okay. One minute more. Fine. Okay, Julia, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to share how Italy is going on the ecosystem accounting process. So I'm talking today on behalf of the Interinstitutional Working Group, already presented by Alessandra. And our work is based on some established principles. The first is that ecosystems mean dynamic complexes of plant, animals, and microorganism communities and their interaction with the long-living environment. And we strongly believe that the definition and mapping of ecosystem types is the ground block of the overall process. So we are devoting a lot of efforts and time for developing this stage of the process as much well as possible. So another established principle is that main structural differences between ecosystem types are of basic importance for accounting, so that forests and grasslands and wetlands have to be considered differently because they are able to provide different services and different quantities of these services. Anyway, we are trying to go beyond these basic principles and especially give attention to the composition and function of ecosystems, because these properties deeply affect both condition and ecosystem services provision capacity. So this is an obvious example. For example, the differences between a Mediterranean evergreen forest with respect to a temperate deciduous forest, because they are able to provide different productive outcomes and are also susceptible to different kind of risks. But it is even more important, some differences also occur within a same physiognomic type. So this is the example of beech forests. We can distinguish beech forests in our country according to a latitudinal gradient, that it is also a bioclimatic gradient. So we can span from beech forests northwards in a true temperate and continental climate up to southernmost beech forests within a true strict Mediterranean context. And these subtypes of ecosystems obviously behave differently. So especially in very heterogeneous countries, it is very important to distinguish ecosystem at these levels. And this is the case of Italy with different bioclimatic conditions, physiographic heterogeneity, biogeographic sectors and influences, and combine the effect on natural vegetation potential, that is the ecological background of our actual ecosystem occurring in the country. This heterogeneity could also be synthesized by the ecoregional mapping, so we have also at disposal an integrated view of this heterogeneity in the country. So the rationale for us is to move beyond land cover and land use monitoring, because it is very important, and go towards actual ecosystem accounting by suitable inputs for structure, composition, function, assessment, and monitoring. So this is the reason why Alessandra already showed we built an interdisciplinary team able to provide different inputs And all these institutions and academics and other official bodies work together in two main transversal working packages. The first devoted to the ecosystem extent, transition metrics and condition accounts, and the second one to ecosystem services accounting, both integrating under an ecological and economic combined perspective. But also the team is arranged into different typological working packages, one devoted to settlement and other artificial areas, but also devoted to voluntary accounting, thematic accounting on urban systems, another devoted to cropland and grassland and forests and wetlands, inland wetlands, river and lakes, and the marine and coastal environment. So we built together a model able to combine in different ways input data from different sources across and along the different reporting periods, and that can be combined in different ways in order to respond to implementation challenges posed not only by the ecosystem accounting, but also by other international and national policies requirement. So the model allows for geometric and thematic comparison and harmonization between different data sets from different sources. And according to this model, we were able to provide the first prototype of an ecosystem map at the national level that is consistent with the mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive criteria, with a proper detail that is able to capture the heterogeneity of ecosystem in the country. And these details can anyway be arranged into the hierarchical typology promoted by the European regulation and easily cross-worked with other classification systems. So what are the strengths and weaknesses of the model? As regard the geometric aspect, first of all, we are able to make a tailored integration between different input data. So for each of the main ecosystem categories, we are testing different inputs, as for example, for artificial areas, the combination between the national map of soil consumption with the urban atlas information, core inland cover, and the ISTA territorial basis. And this kind of combination enabled high frequency monitoring according to the regulation at a high level of detail, and also an harmonized cross-scale representation of ecosystems so that we can easily pass from typological accounting to thematic accounting as for the urban areas. What is the main weaknesses in this model is instead some challenging generalization from land cover land use mosaics to composite ecosystem assets. As in this case, I showed a representation according to the high resolution layer of leaf type. So we can easily suppose that in the green areas we can find not only deciduous trees, but also deciduous forests, and in the red one, evergreen forests. But when we have a mixture between the two, it is quite difficult to set boundaries between ecosystem types and define the extent and geographic pertinence of mixed woods. As for the thematic aspect, we have at disposal an ecosystem typification that is quite detailed. And the strength of this basic map is that it was already consistent with the European environmental policies, because it was made for the implementation of the mapping and assessment ecosystems and their services process. This map already provided a synthesis of vegetation heterogeneity, suitable also for the accounting under the new regulation. And supported previous national assessments of natural capital state and also informed the compilation of the national red list of ecosystems. So it already provided some basic knowledge about the condition of these ecosystem types. Some limitation, however, occur for the adoption of this map as it is for the accounting. First of all, because it was based on a fourth national level of the core inland cover that will be no more available for the future periods, because the minimum mapping unit is not more aligned with the accounting choices we made, especially for forests, and also because of the huge need of expert-based intervention that is high demanding and cannot be replicated so easily during every 3 years. So anyway, the model provided the first prototype of a national ecosystem map represented here at the third level, that is in a raster format with a 10 meters resolution that covers the entire national territory and could be also applied in other countries with biennial replication. Anyway, we are trying to go beyond this first prototype, and for the first mandatory reporting year, that is 2024, we are trying to solve some critical aspects. The first, as regard forests, is, for example, the overcoming of the limits posed by the physiognomic information retrieved from the National Forest Map, because it showed weak consistency and accuracy across administrative ecoregions, many discrepancies with the previous mass map, and also an undefined updating period. So we are trying to put in place a new classification starting from the second level of the EU typology and group and divide these forests by ecoregions so that we can easily reach complexes of forest types that share common bioclimatic, orographic, and biogeographic features. And then, according to this ecoregional arrangement, we will try to put in place some phenological profile in order to distinguish physiognomies within these broad groups. As for artificial areas and urban ecosystems instead, we are trying to improve the thematic accuracy by checking and updating the information provided by the soil consumption map and other Copernicus information with the census sectors provided by ISTAT. And also we are trying to put on a voluntary basis also in a typification of urban ecosystems. So we are trying to distinguish different cities in the country. And for each of these city type also put in place tailored condition assessments. And finally, Alessandra Ferrara already showed that we have at disposal a composite interinstitutional working group that is feeding in a proper way these complex accounting mechanisms, but it is very important, the same group, the participation of different institutions is allowing to a consistent implementation also of other policies at the national level. First of all, the natural restoration regulation, but also the application of the urban forest strategy goals and those posed by the soil monitoring directive and the strategic targets that pose an ambitious nature target for urban, for urban nature plans. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you so much, Julia. Really interesting presentation. I hope people like as me. That's really great. And I don't know if there is some question, short one, because we have the space for, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I am in charge of monetary environmental accounts, so I am very much used to like SNA type, national accounting type of framework. So for me, this kind of accounts where different type of expertise are involved are extremely interesting. And my question would be, because this regulation, the regulation specifically was born in the context of national accounts anyway, do you think that from your point of view, from the point of view of your expertise, the representation of the extent is correct? I mean, you were able to, you or other experts were able to influence the process so that the requirement of the regulation make an accurate representation of the extent accounts and the conditions as well, so that not only there were not an influence of the accountants people only, but other expertise were also adequately considered. And so
Yes, thank you for the question. I think it is basic to introduce a proper detail in this process. Otherwise, we are able to make a land cover accounting, and it is not an ecosystem accounting. So we have to look at biodiversity, and to look at biodiversity, economists have to dialogue with ecologists. So I think it is essential. And we are trying to do our best to improve, and also to demonstrate at the European level that we have to consider this heterogeneity. Thank you for the comment.
Okay, thank you, Julia. And now, sure, this is the leitmotif of the session. So, this is the turn of Maria Luisa Paracchini from the European Commission Joint Research Center. Sorry, yeah, okay. And please, Maria Luisa, the floor is yours. Okay. It's okay for you. Perfect. Thank you, Aldo. Bene. Giulia, puoi venire qui.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this kind invitation to this very interesting workshop. So I will I managed to change slide. I will show two applications of how to map ecosystem condition, starting from explaining what is the concept we ground this exercise on, then going through the ecosystem condition typology from the CAA, of course, the steps to map ecosystem condition, and especially all the issues related to identifying thresholds and reference levels. And then draw some conclusions and the links to further work. The concept is the one from the CAA. So condition is grounded on ecosystem integrity, understood as the capacity of ecosystems to sustain their natural composition, structure, function, and self-organization over time. this is one concept. The concept of good condition is then attached to this and needs to be eventually identified in the data and in the indicators. It's defined as ecosystem is considered in good condition when it presents good physical, chemical, and biological condition with self-reproduction or self-restoration capability, in which species composition, ecosystem structure, and ecological functions are not impaired. So here we already find a difficulty and is in this self-reproduction or self-restoration capability, because we encountered the first problems in dealing with the different kinds of ecosystems, those that are existing in the natural state and those that are of anthropogenic origin. And we will see then using forest and agroecosystems how we propose to solve this issue. So the reference is the ecosystem condition typology of the CAA, where we find the three main categories of abiotic, biotic, and landscape indicators. And they are subdivided in physical, chemical state, compositional, structural, functional, and land and seascape. So what we did in both cases is to look for indicators that are describing these categories. When we move from the concept and the framework to a practical application, we have to solve a number of issues, starting from identifying the variables. And here we crash against the availability. We can only use what is existing. And so we need to find, since we work at the continental scale, EU wall-to-wall coverage and suitable resolution. And for suitable resolution here, we consider anything that spans from let's say 5 meters, because you can always upscale. It's downscaling that is eventually the difficult part, to 10 kilometers, just to give you an idea. Then identifying reference values. Reference values to identify what is the optimal condition, what is the good condition. And here the next question is, do we need to stratify or not to identify all these thresholds, including the pessimal and optimal values against which to normalize the indicators, the variables, so that they become indicators. And because what we do in the end, we aggregate and we obtain one aggregated indicator describing condition. So when we aggregate, then there is the problem of weights. How do we consider all these indicators? Do they have the same weight or not? And if not, which are the weights? There is a second question exactly at this point of the normalization, that is, what do we do with the good condition? Do we know what it is? If yes, how do we embed it in the process? And then in the end, when we get a result, we also need to somehow validate it, though the concept of ecosystem condition as we use it here is relatively new. So there is not that much around that can be used, but we looked for similar exercises, let's say, that start from a similar perspective on the ecosystem. So reference levels. Reference levels, we need basically three. A lower reference level, that is the minimum value. The upper level reference level, that is describing the highest ecosystem integrity. And the good, eventually the good condition level. These come from the natural state if the ecosystem exists in a natural state. If it does not exist in a natural state like cropland or urban, then we need to find other ways to identify these values. And these may come from a number of possibilities. They may come from models, from statistical methods. That means analyzing the data that are existing. So one assumption that one can make is that all what is possible is already existing in nature, and so, or in the reality. And on a basis of a statistical analysis, one takes the lowest and the highest value, cutting the outliers. Prescribed reference values based on science, also discussions in the frame of legislation. Contemporary condition, this is when it is not possible to arrange a priori, like a typical example is the farmland bird index. So for the farmland bird index, usually a year is taken as the base year for calculating then the changes in the values and the trend, or ultimately a combination of methods. The issue of good condition is when it is possible to find this value, then it can be defined a priori where this value sits in the scale 0, 1. So what we did, and you will see it in the example for the agroecosystems, we have set it a priori equal to 0.6 in the scale 0.1. Taking as inspiration all the discussions in the Water Framework Directive. So in the practical applications for forest ecosystems, you find this work published in the paper on nature communications that you see reported in the slide. What happened was that it was clear since the very beginning that this work or the assessment of condition needed to be stratified, because you cannot treat all forests in Europe as they are homogeneous and all similar. So the stratification here was based on the biogeographic regions and the forest classes in Greenland cover. Means 4 forest classes, coniferous broadleaves, mixed and transitional woodland and shrub, by 11 biogeographic regions, that is 44 reference regions, in which to find the reference areas. So in this case, since forests do exist in a natural state, what the colleagues did was to find a sufficient number of pixels representing each of these 44 types of forest, from which drawing the values, the optimal value for the normalization. So they started by using the sites covered by primary forest, that is the map on the left. Then what turned out was that they're, statistically speaking, they were not sufficiently representative. So they added the protected sites that are those on the left. So the combination of the two made it possible to extract the values having a statistical validity to describe the variables that you see here, that are those that were used in the assessment, and that are the goal was at least one per each ecosystem condition typology class. So you have vegetation, water content, soil organic carbon, species richness of threatened forest birds, tree cover density, forest productivity, forest connectivity, and landscape naturalness. Then once this work was done, they identified the range of the indicator and assigned weights. In this case, the weights were assigned by scoring the indicators according to a number of characteristics, and then using those scores to proportionally assign the weights. But this is not the only way to assign weights. We could discuss for a long time on this issue, and it remains an open issue, this of the weights in any case. So at the end of all this, after the normalization, no, sorry, this is before the normalization, they could already identify or calculate the values. This is the average value at continental level per each indicator. So after the stratification of the 7 indicators, and you see, since there were sufficient layers to calculate condition for 2 dates, 2000 and 2018, you see here the changes occurring in these 18 years. The result is that overall condition has improved. The values in 18 are slightly higher than in 2000. This kind of approach allows in the end of getting as output a map that you see here. And in this case, as I said, not only a map, but also a map of changes. So what you have here is that the purple color is a decrease in condition and the green color is an increase. 2/3 of forests have increased their condition and 1/3 has decreased. And then once you get this kind of results, you need to spend much more time to explain these results. I'm not going to do it here also because it's still in process, this analysis, but there are already some indications in the paper that includes fire and climate change, and quite a lot is due to management, this change, in fact. Agroecosystems were treated in a slightly different way. So these are the indicators that we have identified that do fit the requirements. And as you see, the spatial resolution is quite diverse. I mean, we get what we get. We try to remain in this range, in this case, it's from 100 meters to 10 kilometers at maximum. And the weights were here assigned, maintaining each class of the 6, physical, chemical, compositional, structural, functional, landscape, as equal weight, and then dividing by the number of indicators in the class. This applies especially to the chemical one because, as you can see, there are many more indicators there, and so it would be overrepresented if we give the same weights to all these indicators. In this case, we tried to identify the value of good condition per each indicator. So the issue with agroecosystems is, since especially cropland does not exist in a natural state, we should look for reference areas in cropland in Europe, where agriculture is very diverse for very different reasons, and it's an exercise that would take a long, long time if ever we come to an agreement also with stakeholders on what is a cropland in good condition. So we bypassed completely this problem or this question by addressing indicator by indicator and including the information on good condition in the normalization, so that what we get at the end is a result that is already embedding in itself what is in good condition and what is above and what is below, and it's a sort of automatic result that does not need an a priori discussion. And the discussion is on what is the good condition level per each indicator. And what we found is that for the indicators that are in the list, almost all do have one value that can be applied across the European Union. For example, soil erosion 2 tons per hectare. For example, for soil organic carbon, we take it from the upcoming soil monitoring law is a ratio soil organic carbon clay content. In other cases, when we do not know, in fact, there are cases in which it's impossible to set this value, then we take the 60%, the 0.6, in the range 0.1 normalized. This means that in all cases, we force the normalization, we have a bilinear normalization, and we force us to go through 0.6 value, 0.6 when 0.6 is this good condition level. And what we obtain in the end is an assessment of condition for agroecosystems that already contains the fact that any value above 0.6 is, according to the method, is representing agroecosystems in good condition. And once we split them in the 5 quintiles, we have the share of the surface. And what we see is that, interestingly, there is almost half of the EU territory that is in moderate condition. That means it is not already good, but is not far from good. So a question can be, when we had to intervene towards restoration, probably those are the cases where you need less effort. So what do? We concentrate first to what is bad or very bad, or first to what is moderate, that is more easily restorable. This remains an open question. I would like to add that for the grasslands, we tried, since grassland do exist in a natural state, the way taken by forests, but we could not find a sufficient number of pixels to draw the statistics from. So we took this other way. Then we compared with similar exercises. One is a land degradation model, where you see in the x-axis the number of degradation processes in a pixel. And if we compare with our result, we get that there is a trend that is what is expected. So the higher the number of degradation process, the lower the condition, which is encouraging for us. And the other test we did is with the reporting from Article 17 of the Habitats Directive, using favorable areas, ecosystems in favorable condition, and unfavorable, inadequate, and unfavorable bad summed up together. So these are the first 2 columns of the graph. And also this is giving expected result, because favorable condition, favorable conservation status has a higher condition compared to the unfavorable one. Possible applications, once you have a map. So what is interesting of this approach is that in the end you get a map. And so this allows to identify where the problem is, and especially what the problem is, because from the aggregated index, you can always go back to the input layers. And then you can, for agroecosystems, for example, link to the farming practices dataset that we have developed at the JRC, and look for those practices that are solving that issue that is making the area red in the map. And in the same way, this can be linked basically to any legislation that has an impact on land management, the Common Agricultural Policy, nature restoration, soil monitoring and resilience directive, and the upcoming nature credits. What we are doing now is to go forward in this exploration, so find in the data, if the data are telling us what is the link between ecosystem services and condition through the variables that are the same in both cases, in the models of ecosystem services and to assess condition, to analyze, and you see this in the graph upper right, the link between condition and ecosystem services from our models that we have developed in the frame of the CAA in support of Eurostat, so that they are following the CAA requirements. And in support of using literature in support of this exercise. So what literature is telling us about these links, condition indicator, condition either as an indicator or its components, and the models for the ecosystem services. And I conclude because I already am 2 minutes above. So this method is scalable. So is what we like about it also, is that it's fully scalable to any scale you need to apply. Obviously, you have to look for the appropriate data and recalculate most likely all the thresholds. It's suitable for a broad scale assessment. This is the beginning of the story, so there are still many open questions. And especially we see it now because we are working on the second EU ecosystem assessment to be released more or less in a year's time, maybe a bit less. And when we want to apply this to the other ecosystem types, we have different kinds of questions. For example, for water, having the Water Framework Directive, we cannot neglect that at all. So we need to find a solution. Urban has its own questions or issues. So we have to target the approach to the ecosystem type. At the moment, we don't see the same approach applied to all ecosystem types. And as I said, it's a kind of approach that it's open then to a cascade of other applications, including since it is integrated in the environmental economic accounting system, all the links then to the economic sector, eventually for risk mitigation and this other kind of issues and impact assessment. And with this, I think I can conclude. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Maria Luisa. And now we are a short space to question or other. So there is some question for the floor. So, I don't know, maybe just here, table. Please.
Hello, everybody. My name is Alessio Capriolo. I work at ISPRA. Thank you very much, Maria Luisa, for your presentation. Since we are working on the Inca tool models for assessing the biophysical component of the ecosystem services, I was wondering if you see a new generation of models for assessing ecosystem services that are able to assimilate, integrate the condition variables more than the actual generation of models that we have. And if you see also a time horizon to reach this goal.
I think here we have two levels. One is the Inca tool that feeds then the Eurostat tool. So that is linked to the legislation, and it will, as far as I know, it will have an update, but it has to follow the procedure of the official update. In parallel, we are working on this. So we are working on improving the models, on finding this kind of relations, of completing the series that we have in-house, so that for every ecosystem service, we have a time series with the potential, the supply, the mismatch, the valuation, having more models also of ecosystem services, keeping into account double counting, because we want to remain in the frame of the CAA. And at a certain moment, this will become public when we do have all the bunch of data ready and releasable. But we have to always to be careful, because it's like two processes in parallel, and with our work in the GSE that runs in parallel to the official platform, we have to clarify, so not to generate like interferences then in the official reportings. But this will be disseminated in due time.
As for the Alessio question, the next speech of Mandy Travis will be focused on that, so we can hear the opinion of Mandy too. So there are any other questions?
Hi, thanks. That was really interesting. I'm Alec Jacobs from the UK Office for National Statistics. It was a really impressive model, but it's pulling an awful lot of data together into one place. What's the, forgive me if you've said this and I missed it, what's the time resolution like? So how frequently is it feasible to update this kind of assessment, do you think? And if the turnover is quite a long time, what do we do in between?
Because the question is related to the fact that the reporting should be yearly. I understand that this kind of assessment is a bit beyond what is requested, the strict sense by the report. Because this kind of assessment, I think it makes sense if it is made every maybe 6 years, something like that, so that you do see some changes. And it's quite burdensome, that's true. Maybe when you get used to it, it becomes quicker, but it does not remain the same over time, because things change. So you have different data, you know more about the thresholds, you have new data, and then you do have a problem of keeping your temporal series. I see this as a huge problem, keeping the temporal series, because any change you inject in the assessment changes the results. And then, like in Corinne, they do retrospectively, they recalculate the whole series back. It's an open question. I mean, this is for us all, is the start of the process, and we have to keep this in continuation.
Thank you. Please, Professor.
Yes, so I'm Paul Eakins from University College London, and I'm working with ONS on some of these issues, but it was fantastic, the presentation, really, really interesting, and is very similar in approach to what I will present tomorrow, except that what we've done is much, much simpler, and it arrives at a single number for strong sustainability, we call it. My questions really are two. I mean, the first relates to the complexity. Now, we know that these natural systems are complex, and it's terrific to see the level of complexity that you are able to provide data for. I suspect that's changed enormously over the last few years. I just wonder, as I work a lot with policymakers, and I don't want to be rude about policymakers, but their ability to process that level of sophistication is as close to zero as makes no difference. So that's why we've been very keen to go to a single number like GDP, which has been my ambition for at least 40 years. And I'll explain how we do that tomorrow. But I wonder whether you can relate the work that you're doing with your reference values, because we've also tried to identify reference values, with the idea of sustainable environmental function, which has been our definition of strong sustainability. And I noticed that several speakers in the earlier sessions used that concept of environmental function, which to my knowledge goes back to 1992 and the book of Rudolf de Groot called Functions of Nature. And I'm sure that you know that book, which was very inspiring for me. So just those two things, the level of sophistication that you're working at and how one might get policy impact with that, and the relationship of your reference values to environmental functions.
So the first question is interesting because being the Commission, we are a Directorate General of the European Commission. We are the technical branch, and we discuss a lot with our colleagues in Brussels, DG Environment and DG Agri. So I think that through the years, they got more and more used to this kind of discussion at this level. What I always learned when we have the meetings with the member states is that very often they have very complex questions. They know very well data, and I mean, we have seen it here. So when Julia comes to the meetings, she has the kind of questions that you have found in her presentation. So the dialogue is very at a very high level, high in the sense of science. What happens then is when you go to a legislation. When you go to a legislation, you can't have this. You need these smaller numbers, smaller than are bigger. They contain a lot of things. So the difficulty is there because when there are all the negotiations across, you need to be much more simple. But this provides the exercises like this, the background or the backbone, because in the end, even if you have a more synthetic figure or variable or indicator, it must ground on something that is very steady, as steady as possible, scientifically and accepted by stakeholders and by ministries. So it's the two aspects are reinforcing each other. I find that there is a communication between the two levels, the more complex one and the synthetic one. They are not at all separated. I don't know if this answers your question. The other question? Yeah, we are not at the moment doing this kind of reflection about the functions, because we now work with the services. So from the moment when there was this sort of shift that the categories of ecosystem services embedded there was the fourth category that was embedded in the other three. Now I forgot the name. We remain on the side of the ecosystem services. So we model the ecosystem services, and in our frameworks, the conceptual frameworks, we don't use the function part in this moment any longer. This doesn't mean that it cannot come back, because things are really evolving quite much. In fact, if I can add just one example of how they evolve, we are doing now the second ecosystem assessment. The first one was released in 2020. This new one will be released in early 27, so it's not even a decade. And we had to review quite heavily the conceptual framework, because meanwhile, IBES had its own, the CA arrived with its own, we merged, or we tried to embed the two. This meant that all the indicators we used for the different ecosystem types had to be reviewed and reassessed. What goes into pressures, what goes into condition. So things don't remain the same. It's a flow of knowledge that impacts continuously for good. I hope for good.
Is Mandy. Okay, then Mandy can for sure. Should be able.
Thanks, Aldo. Yes, I can.
Try.
The chat
The
is
miracle.
disabled, so people are not going to be able to put questions in the chat, just to note that. So
Mandy, can you hear?
yeah, I can hear.
Do you want to try to write something and we try to explain? Mandy? Okay, so we try to imagine a picture.
If I may.
Please, Mandy.
Shall I go ahead with the question?
No.
Okay, we will try and solve the issue during the coffee break also, because Mandy is the next speaker in the session, so we will have to. Meanwhile, I would ask a question to Professor Paracchini, but also listening to Julia on this may be interesting. First, a quite technical point I'm not sure how to make. From what you said about non-natural ecosystems, I understand that the reference condition cannot be, or you imply that it cannot be, or you decided that it cannot be a natural state. I've come across a similar case working on ecosystem services, where you also have the need sometimes to have a reference level. And it was stunning, the example of the Indian colleagues who put forth the issue that agricultural land doesn't provide a positive contribution to soil retention, as long as you take a reference condition that is the natural state, what would have been there instead of crops or cropland. That is forest in their case. So this would be a negative service. And I suppose the same can happen with conditions. Think of carbon soil, organic carbon, soil organic carbon that you mentioned. So wouldn't it be maybe appropriate to have, instead of 0-1 intervals, 0-1 ranges for the same indicators in different concerning referring to different ecosystems, different ranges to, so this would be one question. Then I'll ask another one if there's time. Thank you.
I'm not sure it would solve, it would solve the problem, giving different ranges in the end, because I'm trying to think. It's I liked a lot the presentation by Professor Turner, because here we are almost at the philosophical level in setting these conceptual frameworks. So the question is, what is an agroecosystem? How you conceptualize it, since we have to eat, so you need it. You need it. You can't imagine that the world is a forest. So you need it, and then you, from our point of view, we consider that as an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem. Also, we mask it out. So we analyze it like it is existing only this in that moment, the agroecosystem. And that is our assumption. So this is why we have the 0-1 also there. And we don't consider that, and I'm thinking agroforestry could have the highest value for soil retention eventually, because it's what is more similar to a forest within agroecosystems. So since that is existing and is a kind of land management for agriculture, those values are embedded in what you analyze when you look at your data. So in fact, it's already there. Maybe in this moment, there is not so much in Europe to have an impact on the values themselves, but it is there. So the range of values that you find is what is doable and feasible and existing. So as long as you don't have a system that is not really existing, probably the optimum would be a mix between agroforestry and agroecology. Then you have the maximum performance of the ecosystem. We could discuss about the yields. It's a socio-ecological system. So you need to conceptualize it, give it boundaries, know exactly why you are defining it that way, so that you are able to explain, and then you know also how to use the results.
So we can stop now for a coffee break, and then we can follow the session, the next presentation about the two speakers for the second part of the session. So please, if you want to have a coffee break, and we will be here in 20 minutes, around 20.